going to be about the new EB5 program. And we're going to discuss about the future prospects, the opportunities, and this will be moderated by Mark Davies. So before I invite Mark, I would like to invite our panelists on stage. Please put your hands together first for Mr. Hogan, who's the Vice President of Project Development CMB Regional Centers. Guys, the energy cannot be this thing out. Come on, big round of applause. Thank you. Please join us, Matt. So he has been, Matt oversees CMB's team responsible for the identification of new opportunities and initial project underwriting, negotiating, structuring of each of CMB's EB5 partnership loans. And for those of you who heard him earlier, know exactly what he does. And up next, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to request Mr. Ignacio Donoso, Managing Partner, Donoso and Partners, LLC Canada, to please join us. Thank you. I give the pause for that. Welcome, Mr. Donoso. So he is also a renowned businessman, immigration lawyer for the United States and Canada. He has particular expertise working with investors, technology companies, academics, and researchers. And if you attended this session earlier in the morning, I'm sure you guys must have loved it. Up next, ladies and gentlemen, I request you please join me in welcoming Sameer Jain, Managing Director, GCC, India and Southeast Asia, EB5 Affiliate Network, USA. He is a seasoned banker and financial services professional with over 20 years of international experience spanning UK, Middle East, and of course, India. Okay, up next, I'm going to request David Amaro to please join us. David is the head of Capital Markets, Americas and India, Motcomb Capital, USA EB5. Prior to joining Motcomb Capital, Mr. Amaro worked at Lightstone Group and LCR Capital Partners, where he helped establish their EB5 offices in Brazil, India, and South Africa. Thank you so much, Mr. Amaro, for joining us today. And finally, I request you please join me in welcoming our moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Davies. Please, can we have a round of applause? So, Mark Davies is the Managing Partner, Davies Associates, USA EB5. Mark, would you like to take that seat, or do you want to take the podium, wherever you like?
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the EB5 panel this afternoon. It probably would be helpful to know something about the audience to kind of pitch the level of this. So if you are an investor interested in EB5, stick your hand up. So 2 people. If you're an agent who has lots of EB5 investors, stick your hand up. Okay, so it's a sort of a balance between that and everybody else who's interested in Malta and just sticking onto the right, I see. Okay, if you know what an I-526 is, put your hand up. So like one. So very basic introduction to what we're doing. So let's kick off. Let's do very fast introductions. So I'm Mark Davies, I run a law firm, we do lots of EB5s, especially for India. Okay, that's all you need to know about me. Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matt Hogan, Vice President of Project Development for CMB. CMB is one of the oldest regional centers in the industry, been around for about 25 years, one of the largest active EB5 regional centers. We've worked with almost 6,000 clients now from 104 different countries, many of which here in India. And that's about what you need to know about us. We focus on EB5.
Hi, my name is Ignacio Donoso. I'm Managing Partner of Donoso and Partners. We're an immigration law firm based in Washington, D.C. We offer services for visas for the United States and Canada. In relation to the EB5 program, it's really one of the strongest parts of our law firm's practice. We've done just around 3,000 visas, and we're proud to say that many of the recent visas that we filed in early August were in fact with CMB projects. And we're anxiously looking forward to approval because they were rural projects, and we'll explain why that's relevant. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Sameer Jain. I'm the Managing Director of EB5 Affiliate Network. I used to be based in Mumbai along with my colleague Rishabh Davies up until last year. Rishabh is still here in India, but I have moved bases to Dubai just to cater to a wider market segment. But just want to let you know that we are based in India and we are very happy to travel to come and meet you and support our partners who are trying to source their clients from these regions.
Hi, I'm David Amaro, head of capital markets at Motcomb Capital. We're a new EB5 firm comprised of EB5 veterans with over 40 years of experience, hundreds of millions of dollars of EB5 capital raised. Been in EB5 for almost a decade now. Been working with the India market just about as long as I've been in the EB5 space, so happy to help anyone that's interested.
Okay, so judging that there are some people who know nothing about EB5, Samir, you've been in the industry quite a long time. What is EB5? How much does it cost? And how does it work? Just in the briefest of synopsis.
Thanks, Mark. So EB5, in very simple terms, is the investment visa program of US. Somebody who's looking at getting themselves or their families US green cards could invest $800,000 in a project, and this would enable the investor, the spouse, and any children under the age of 21 to avail of US green cards. So the investment amount is $800,000, and the process is very simple. Once you decide that you want to do EB5, you'll reach out to let's say a regional center like us who have projects, and we can take you through the projects. We can explain you the benefits of investing in our project, and once you've selected a project, you would then need to engage a US immigration attorney. The US immigration attorney would help you to put together the documentation for your project, for your petition. So essentially, if I just break it down into three simple parts, the documents would be the petition itself, the subscription agreement of the project, and let's say the source of fund documentation, which is a very important part of your documentation.
Let's go into this in a little bit more. David, Samir said that the required investment is $8 lakh US, $800,000 US. Someone was telling me about a project that was $1,050,000. What's that about?
Right, so there are actually two separate programs. If you invest $800,000 is in a program that is in a TDA, or what's called a targeted employment area, or there's a $1,050,000 investment, and that can be anywhere in the US.
What's a target employment area?
A target employment area is an area with higher than 150% of the national average of unemployment rate. So what really the US is looking to do is, this is a job creating program. So we can get into this a little bit long, later on, but what it's trying to do is stimulate the economy and create jobs in the US, while at the same time facilitating foreign investors to get in the US and get their green cards.
Gotcha. So, Ignacio, I know you're a lawyer, but perhaps I can ask you a slightly non-legal question. I'm a little bit confused. Like, someone was saying that this is sort of a very safe investment to me, but without commenting on the financials, he just said like high unemployment. That sounds like high risk to me. So, what how does that play out?
Thank you. So the interesting thing about what we're seeing right now in 2022, September, EB5 landscape, is that the program has become perhaps more transparent and more predictable for investors than ever before. And the Immigration Service is now operating under a new statute that was passed just now in March of 2022. And that statute created categories, very clear categories, for investors who want to use the opportunity to prioritize their visas. So there were three categories: high unemployment areas, rural areas, and infrastructure projects. All of those types of projects, or areas for investment, receive one specific benefit, is that they have visas reserved for them. That's really interesting in terms of...
What do you mean, sorry, what do you mean by visas reserved? I don't understand what you're talking about.
Visas that are allocated to the category in preference to other categories. So what that did, and it's really quite extraordinary, is that it created the opportunity for new investors to go straight to the front of the line. Now, I know that sounds unfair, and frankly it is. And I represent thousands of EB5 investors, but the truth is that it's exactly what it does.
So I've had clients, right, who've been waiting a long time, like maybe they filed even as back as 2017. What you're telling me, Ignacio, is if they come to your law firm instead of mine, they can jump the queue and they can get immediate processing?
I'm not going to pit our law firms one against the other, but I will say this. If an investor from India is facing a visa waiting list, right, this new visa allocation system allows them to skip the visa waiting list. It's one of the most important outcomes of the March 2022 legislation. And I mentioned earlier something really important. I said the projects, the investments that we filed in early August were with one of CMB's rural projects. Now, the Immigration Service is now subject to a new second piece of important information. I said first that the visa reservation system or allocation system, let's go to the front of the line. Rural projects get a second benefit, which is that they have priority processing by law. It's quite something. So, rural projects are interesting for investors because not only can they go to the front of the line, but they also get priority processing without having to make a special request for it or pay an acceleration fee. These are two of the important changes that happened. There's one more that I think you should be aware of, but I'll give the voice back to Mark.
So let's just kind of put this in context. We're talking about processing times and processing lines. Matt, how do some of the people didn't know what an I-526 is. So how do I initiate this system? What is a processing line? And then how does what Ignacio just described factor into that?
Yeah, so what creates the backlog that we talked about and why these reserved visas are so important is that the program is limited to 10,000 visas annually. And then within that 10,000, every country is limited to 700 visas before they, what's called retrogress. At the point in time in which they retrogress, anyone who's applying for a visa beyond that number of 700 has to wait to the end of that year. In any countries that didn't consume their allotment and any visas that are left over in that 10,000, that amount, that number, would then be able to grab those unused visas. Unfortunately, starting in 2014, investors from China started to invest very, very heavily in the EB5 program and have created a backlog that's going to consume the vast majority of those visas, those extra visas for years to come. So investors from India, prior to this new law passing, were definitely only going to be able to receive those 700 visas, and we're not going to be able to get visas that were going to be set aside for any other category. So let me jump into process now, and I think it'll kind of dovetail into that backstory. Right now, investors who invest in the program under this new law can have access to those visas that are set aside. So of that number of visas, that 10,000 visas, there's a portion that's set aside for, as we talked about, rural, set aside for high unemployment area, set aside for the other, for infrastructure. And so what's going to happen is you'll file an initial petition, that's called that 526 petition. Once that petition gets approved, that's when you'll be eligible for your visa. Now, if there's a backlog and before those visa set-aside categories were created, you may have to wait the following year or maybe a couple of years for your number to be called in order for a visa to be available for you. Now, if you are applying in one of those set-aside categories and those have not been consumed, meaning they're still current, which as of today, those set-aside categories, those reserved visa categories, are current, you would be eligible to receive that visa right away. That's where this all comes into play. That's why that's important for investors from India. Investors from India would get access to those reserved visas until the point in time in which all of those visas are consumed.
Gotcha. So, as a practical matter, what does all that mean? So, typically, I guess a good question is, CMB and the last the others too, sees a lot of applications. what sort of processing times have you seen? You know, understanding it might be a little misleading, but what sort of processing times have you seen? And then what do you think you're going to see in some of these set-aside categories?
Yeah, the set-aside categories are really a mystery because they've only come out since March. Investors have only been able to file petitions since about August. There was a process by which the US government was going to come out with forms that needed to be filed. They eventually came out with those forms and they added some more hiccups along the way. CMB was lucky to be probably the first, one of the first, if not the first regional centers to get a receipt notice for one of our petitions that had been filed, a project petition that had been filed, allowing investors in our projects to begin filing their petitions. So those are just now being filed. So we have no idea how long it's going to take for those petitions to be approved. But what I would tell you is before this law changed and before the program had shut down, I think processing times, on average, our experience is we were seeing processing times somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 months. Now, you're going to have some regional centers that'll tell you, oh, all of mine were getting processed in 6 months, whatever. We've had petitions processed in as little as 18 days. But I wouldn't tell you to expect 18 days. I'd tell you to expect something that's probably a little bit more reasonable and a little bit more on average. So I think overall you're going to see petitions being processed in about 24 months. Now, the rule category, the rule set-aside category, did provide another little tidbit of language in there that was included in the new EB5 Reform and Integrity Act that was passed in March. And it created a new concept called priority processing. It's not defined. It didn't exist before. We don't know what it means. We don't know if it'll be 6 days, 6 months, 6 years. But we hope it means that if you invest into a rural project, you might get your petition processed a little sooner, but time will tell, because as I mentioned, investors are just now filing those petitions, so there's really no experience to say how long we expect those to be processed. One thing that's really important, and I'll hand it back to you, Mark, is that part of the new EB5 Reform and Integrity Act was the USCIS being required to complete a fee study over the next 12 months that will increase fees and hopefully reduce the processing time for those petitions. Their target processing times for those types of petitions are as little as 90 or 180 days in certain instances. So hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll see on average all of the processing times coming down dramatically. That's our hope.
Right, so I mean, the new law is good news in that, you know, there's some legal requirement that, you know, hopefully this process improves. But this rural category and processing times, let's give the other two an opportunity to comment on that. You guys have rural projects, right?
Yep. So we, as a regional center, we have projects in the high unemployment category, and which have a 10% visa set aside. We also have project in the rural category, which has a 20% visa set aside, as was just discussed, with a priority processing. So we have projects in both these categories.
Yes, likewise with Motcomb, we have a project that meets both requirements, rural and high TDA. I think I will agree with Matt that we're very hopeful that this will, you know, speed up the process for people that are applying at this point. But as of now, we really don't know what that's going to mean. But at the same time, and over the past couple of years, there's been a huge decrease in applications. One, due to the price increase, and two, just because there was a lot of back and forth. Where I think hopefully that freed up some time, and hopefully USCIS can get up to date and start processing cases again.
Right, so one of the problems, complaints you get in India about EB5 is processing time. So what I'm hearing from the panelists, and you're lucky you've got, this guy's, unfortunately for me, a very good lawyer, right? So, this guy runs the second oldest, biggest regional center, and these two regional centers are, you know, are certainly ones that are up and coming and doing very well. So the people you've got on stage are giving you a very, very fair, good overview of things. So that's processing time, good news. Now, we're talking about the regional center program. So part of what people have to do is choose projects, right? So I don't think we can have any kind of basic discussion about EB5 without talking about how to choose a project. So there's these things called regional centers. Ignacio, why don't you explain to us what a regional center is, how it works, and then we'll let each of the panelists talk about their regional center.
Thank you. It's a very straightforward concept. The U.S. Immigration Service is authorized based on an application to certify a private company, this is the United States, always private enterprise, right? So a private company whose business is the preparation of projects that will create investment and jobs, because this is first and foremost a job creating program. As far as the United States is concerned, the reason that foreign investors are being invited to participate in the EB5 program is because the United States wants to create jobs in areas throughout the United States, with emphasis in rural, high unemployment, and infrastructure projects. So that's basically.
So we have people come to us in India, Ignacio, who say to us, so these rural projects, that's part of the US government, or there's some kind of US government guarantee on those, right?
Well, the concept of guarantees have been, thrown around the EB5 program since it was created in 1993. And there's two things about guarantees you need to know. One, you cannot have a guarantee on capital based from the new commercial enterprise. That's the company that you're investing into. Okay? There have been insurance products that have been used sometime, but the bottom line is you cannot have a guarantee on the investment. It has to be at risk of what? Profit and unfortunately loss. This is the United States. Welcome to private enterprise. Profit and loss. And the other guarantee is that the government, the immigration service, is going to ensure that your project is successful. And once again, this is the United States. Private enterprise, government does not guarantee the success of your project. It doesn't guarantee that it will create the requisite number of jobs, and it doesn't guarantee that your money will be recovered at the end of the investment. Successful regional centers, including all the regional centers here, and of course CMB does have the longest track record, but also have a great company as well. They do ensure that their diligence and their efforts and their dedication and management skills are used to help the project achieve both its job creating goals and its capital return goals. But the federal government, through the U.S. Immigration Service, does not guarantee the project's success.
So Matthew, seems to me, I invest my money in your regional centre, but it's all about the project. So how do you go about finding projects? As an investor, how can I be certain that the projects that CMB putting my money into, my money's as safe as it can be?
Safe as it can be is kind of key there. So we're talking about investments into two criteria. Rural areas and high unemployment areas are what are really going to set the standard in EB5 because they allow someone to invest at a lower investment amount. Investments in rural areas and high unemployment areas can be risky. That's why the US government created programs like this to drive money into those types of regions, because traditional investment companies, banks, are less likely to lend in those particular regions. But the programs themselves don't have to be inherently risky, and you can structure them very carefully. The other thing that you can do is try and work with the best possible developers you can find. Vet those projects, underwrite those projects like any other bank would do, put collateral requirements in if you're using a loan.
Give me an example of some things CMB would do to underwrite a project.
Sure. First thing we're going to do is, number one, we're going to look at the track record of the developer that we're working with. We're going to want to know who they are, what their history is, how long they've been in business, what their expertise is in the asset class in which they're operating. That just goes without saying. Then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the actual, no-brainer, right? We're going to look at the actual project. Does it pencil out? We're going to stress test the models. We're going to make sure that the asset is actually in a region that can support that asset. Just because it's in a high unemployment area doesn't necessarily mean it won't be able to support the asset. Depends on what it is. Depends on what you're building. There are also pockets of high unemployment, chronically high unemployment, that might be in areas that aren't actually that bad economically on the whole, but fit for this program. So you can find those sorts of reasons, or those sorts of regions within the United States. So then when you're actually getting into the project, you're looking at really basic stuff that anyone would. Is it properly permitted? Is it fully entitled to move forward? Are there any other challenges, legal challenges that exist on the project or on the site or against the developer that would prevent it from moving forward? Remember, what you need at EB5 is job creation. So if that project gets stalled in some way, shape, or form and doesn't get finished, you're not going to get the job creation completed. And the investors at the end of the day are going to get sent home for not meeting that basic goal. And then obviously, beyond the job creation is the economic side of it. That's when I get into as I mentioned, stress testing those models, making sure that there's either appraisals or market studies that support that.
So if I'm not familiar with CMB, one of the questions I might ask is, Matthew, is it just you sitting in a garage somewhere in Illinois looking at stuff, or do you have a team of experts who are used to these kinds of due diligence activities?
So that's a great question, because in our early days, we actually had a lot of people visit our offices in Rock Island. And I remember having one particular investor visit the office. It was 2011, I was relatively new at CMB. We had about 25 employees at that point in time when this investor visited, and they said, I wanted to come by and see your offices and meet your staff because I went to go visit another regional center, and it was literally a guy working out of his garage. There was one person who filed for this designation, had a regional center, was going to go work with, a couple of different people, put a ragtag group together, find a project, go over to China, which is what that particular person's plan was at that time, and go raise investment dollars. CMB now has about 50 employees. We have 2 offices, our original office in Rock Island, Illinois, and then our headquarters is in Dallas, Texas. We have teams, we have an entire finance team that underwrites the projects. My team is more so on the origination side of the projects, basic preliminary underwriting, identifying the projects from an EB5 standpoint, structuring them from an EB5 standpoint. Our finance team, we have an in-house economics team. We have accountants in-house that monitor the projects, financials and things of that nature along the way. We have a construction compliance team that actually goes into site visits, that does draw reporting and things of that nature throughout the process, and then provides reporting to our clients on construction status. So we have a very robust team of professionals. We have 5 in-house business attorneys that don't do immigration. They just work on our deals every day. That's what they do. And so when you're doing due diligence on the regional center, that's very important. Who are the people that are identifying these opportunities, structuring these opportunities, and who's going to be there day in, day out to make sure that project is on foundation?
I mean, one of the things that rings my alarm bells, frankly, is when you see a project and the lawyers that have written the loan documents are an immigration law firm, right? Immigration lawyers, we have our places, EB5 lawyers. I would suggest that a major structured loan that's written by an immigration lawyer is not something. My suggestion is, look at the project, who they're using as counsel, right? They should be using a pucker firm that knows how to structure a financial deal. Not an immigration law firm with one paralegal somewhere, and you'll see that practice. And I know those guys do that, and I know these two do that too. But so, let's say you did a good project, you get into it. Role of the regional center probably shifts a little bit to being an asset manager, right? To making sure the client stays safe. So perhaps Samir and David, you can talk to, you've chosen a good project. How do you make sure it stays safe and that the borrower is doing what they're supposed to do?
So one of the first things we do is, as Matt was mentioning, we choose the right project. For this, what we do is, for a real estate project, we look for a great developer. Somebody who's got a great track record. For example, in our current project, we have a developer who has a 30-year track record, has done $15 billion worth of development, has never not finished a project, has never defaulted on a loan. So, all these ensures that that trend will continue, that he's going to finish the project, he's going to not default on his loans, come what may. And we've seen periods of financial meltdown, COVID happening, and in all these tough periods, they have maintained their loans in good stead. One of the other things we do is we try to look for developers who are not very needy, which means that they have their skin in the game. They have put their equity in the project. They have finance tied in the project. Somebody who has a good credibility, where a financial institution is willing to lend to them, is a very good credit for you, right? Somebody's already done the due diligence for you. So these are things that we look at, and then we go to these developers and we say, carve out a portion and give it to us to offer to our EB5 investors. So when you get a project like this, you know that this is a very conservatively structured project that you can invest and you can sleep at night. I think these are some things that we look at.
Once you're going, right? Once the money's deployed, how do you make sure that your borrower, which is the developer probably, that your borrower is compliant, that they're doing what they're supposed to do, that your investors are protected?
So we have, 2-3 things that we do. We have employed a third-party fund administrator, NES Financials, for the fund administration side. We also do quarterly due diligence. We go down to the developer, we look at their progress. We issue quarterly reports, which we send out to all our investors who are invested in the project. So they see that the progress on the project. We make sure that the loans that they've taken are in good stead. So, we do all this, and we not just keep it to ourselves, we share that in a quarterly report to you so that it gives you also that peace of mind.
Yeah, I agree with Samir. I think visibility is a big key. You definitely want to work with someone who is upfront about where the capital is being placed, and that there's a third-party CPA or fund administrator that's going to show you exactly where your funds are going. And then another thing, and this isn't something that you can vet very easily, but I know that everyone here is very open and has a good line of communication with their investors after they invest. There are a lot of players out there that once they have your money, you'll never hear from them again. So it's always good that you build a relationship with the firm itself and make sure that there's an open line of communication there, so that when you do have a question or when you do have something come up during the process after you've invested, you can pick up the phone and talk to somebody and not just hear crickets.
How do you talk about investor care and updates? Do you send regular updates to investors, David?
Yes, so quarterly updates are always necessary. I think the investors want the visibility, even if they're not asking for it. It's always helpful that they can see where their funds are going, where the funds are being placed, that it's all done the way that they've been told. And then, like I said, after those quarterly updates, if they have other calls, if they have other questions, to just be open to be able to answer those at any moment.
Okay, so we've invested in the project, we found our I-526, we kind of get it approved, we know that maybe it took 2 years, maybe it's a lot faster than one of these set-asides. Ignacio, what happens next, right? Now I-526 gets adjudicated.
So the I-526, as we mentioned earlier, is the first step in what is essentially a 3-step immigration process that takes up at least 5 years, could be up to 6 or 7 years. So step number 1, form I-526, the visa petition. Once it's approved, if you're abroad, you go to the consulate and get your visa appointment, and get your visa. And then you have to enter the United States within 6 months of your visa being issued, okay? If you're in the United States, you can do something a little different, which is sometimes very interesting. You can file for adjustment of status. And the new legislation in March of 2022 did something superb. If you're living in the United States, you can file simultaneously the I-526 visa petition with adjustment of status to obtain a temporary work permit, temporary travel permit in the United States. This is very novel, but there has to be no visa waiting list. So that's why those 3 categories, infrastructure, high unemployment, and rural, become so important, because there are no visa waiting lists in those categories. And if you have your approval, right, you want to go to the consulate as soon as possible. If you're subject to a visa waiting list, you have to wait. If you're not, you get your consulate appointment.
Let me ask you a question about concurrent filing. So one of the things, if I get a green card, right, ignoring wait times to citizenship, if I get a green card, one might say the benefits that, and the right to work where I want to in America, as long as I'm not selling illegal drugs on the streets of Chicago or something, I can do what work I want to do, right, and I can travel where I want to do. If I do concurrent filing, how does that help with those things?
Well, concurrent filing, let's go back to what I just said. Step number 1, you simultaneously file Form I-526 with adjustment of status because you are lawfully residing in the United States and there's no visa waiting list in the visa category you applied. Are you allowed to travel? Under 2 circumstances, yes. 1, you hold H-1B status or you hold L-1 status. Or 2, you have a temporary travel permit issued by the Immigration Service, which you apply for simultaneously with the adjustment of status application. If you do not have those 2 items, you cannot travel. So it creates a travel blackout period. But some people say, look, I'd rather have to travel this blackout period because I get the work permit. And the work permit frees me up to do what? To do anything, to invest, to start my own company, to work part-time, work for different companies. It frees you up from the H-1B program, for example. It frees you up from the L program, for example. Or if you're a student, and we have many, many clients of ours that are in fact students in the United States, it frees you up from the OPT system or having to complete a program of studies that you actually don't really want to pursue because you had to continue your studies because you weren't selected in the H-1B lottery. So we see a lot of situations where this kind of opportunity, the ability to file simultaneously Form I-526 Step 1 visa application with adjustment of status is tremendously helpful. But I fully expect that the Immigration Service and the Department of State will start scheduling appointments a little faster. I think Matt is generally right. I think the caution from the rest of the panel is also right. We won't see a change overnight. The government just doesn't work that way. But we will see improvement in 2023 in appointment scheduling, which right now is quite long. You're looking at 6 months, maybe longer. But in 2023, I think it'll be back down to normal when the worst of the COVID delays are behind us. And again, the government is charged with doing things to get this program off the ground and to deliver results for investors.
Let me ask you something else, actually, because I've heard this said, and I'm just interested in your view. So I have sat on panels where I have heard immigration lawyers tell people in the audience, go get yourself a B1 visa, go to America on a B1, B2 visa, and concurrently file. She'll comment on that. Let's say the act of counseling someone to do that in advance, and then the idea of using a B1, B2 visa kind of in that context and changing your mind after you enter the country anyway, versus perhaps other visa categories. And the reason I'm asking is because I've heard what I think is professional malpractice, but perhaps you have a different view, and I think there's some risk, but if you don't, then that's fine too.
Well, this is, the way I look at the world and advising clients is that my clients are typically high net worth families, and I take care of them with the responsibility of dealing with somebody who knows the difference between good legal advice and bad legal advice. So what I try to do is to offer them an understanding of risk. What is the risk of doing something? The strategy of arriving to the United States on a visitor visa and staying to apply for a green card has never been straightforward, okay? No matter what category. In fact, there's movies from Hollywood that have been written about doing exactly this. One of them is called Green Card, with Gerard Depardieu and Amy McDowell. It's a very charming film from the late 80s, I think. The key issue is, what do you tell the officer at the airport when you land? Whether it's LA or Detroit or Chicago or New York. If you say, well, I'm coming just for a visit, I'm going to see my aunt, and then I'm going to go shopping at Bloomingdale's, see the Statue of Liberty, and go home. Lo and behold, 3 days later, you apply for any kind of green card. You're going to have a problem with the Immigration Service. So advising a client to do something of this nature when there's a $800,000+ price tag attached to it, you have to be very cautious and warn the client that there are actually specific guidance that were developed during the Trump administration on this issue. It's from 2018, tremendously important, and I wouldn't cavalierly advise any family, especially the families that are my clients, high net worth families, to do something like that without really carefully thinking it through. So that's my answer.
Cheers, thanks. So Matt, a lot of visas and things. You've been in America for 2 years. There's another form number to file to confirm your green card. It's I-829. But perhaps you can talk to us, because I think it just got a little bit more complicated and opaque about when you can get your money back. Perhaps it's good to understand what the position was before we had the new law, and why I'm a little bit confused about what it might be right now. And then, what does that mean for CMB and when you're giving people their money back, or letting people have their money back?
Yeah. So previously, there was policy out that the U.S. government had made very clear that the investor needed to sustain their investment through their 2-year conditional residency period. So that 2-year conditional residency period starts when you first get that green card. So as Ignacio was mentioning, you go through that 526 process, you get that conditional residency, you can enter the United States, you have to remain in the United States for 2 years before you can file your last petition, your I-829 petition. At the end of that 2 years, you've been deemed to have completed your 2-year conditional permanent residency period. And they've always referred to that as the sustainment period. At that point, the US government said, hey, you're eligible to get your capital back. This new law makes it a little bit more ambiguous, and Mark, what I think Mark is getting into is that the new law actually struck that language on sustainment period, and they replaced it with something that's a little bit more ambiguous, and it talks about the investment needing to be made for a minimum of 2 years. I think that there's going to be more regulation that comes out on this, because it's a little confusing. Do they mean that you can make your investment and then 2 years from the date that you've made your investment, you can technically become eligible to get your money back? Or do they still actually mean they want you to complete your 2-year sustainment period as they had previously determined it? It's a little ambiguous. What
But it
is
sounds like it could have gotten better. Like the ambiguity is
the
it could have
ambiguity?
gotten better.
Yeah, from an investor's perspective, it could have gotten better. But then there's also things that make you question whether or not it is going to be better from an investor's perspective. I do think that we need to be very careful with all of this, because it would be very easy for regional centers that are maybe a little bit operating on the fringes to put together some quick schemes that are basically saying, hey, you can make a very quick investment, get in and get out in 2 years, you get your money back, you get your green card eventually, right? And I would caution people to try and take an approach like that until the US government has had an opportunity to come out with regulation on this, or put out some policy manual updates on this, because we just really don't know. If they adopt that, it could be a good thing for investors. It could mean that even if there is a green card backlog, you may be in a situation where you could get your money back at the end of the original loan, whether it be 5 years or 6 years, or say it gets repaid early in year 4 or what have you. It could mean that you could get your money back sooner. But it could open up a scenario whereby there are some schemes out there that you would need to be very weary of, where people are trying to do some things that would allow you to just get in and get out. And the next couple of years, too good to be true, right? So the next couple of years will be very interesting, because that's when that timeline will kind of come to fruition from an investor's perspective who's invested after this new law.
How much money has CMB paid your investors?
We paid our investors back, knock on the door of $1 billion. So we've raised about $3 billion. We're very close to 2,000 investors repaid at this point.
All right, guys, your turn to talk about money that you pay back. David, over your career, not just where you are now, you've been at places that have paid lots and lots of money back, right?
Yeah, so I was at 2 regional centers previously. I would say I'd have to ballpark guess, probably in the $20 to $40 billion range. Investors I personally dealt with. What the actual number for each regional center is much, much higher, but just from the people I've met with and that I've worked with, that's probably roughly around that.
So let me ask you a different question then. If I'm an investor, you've got a lot of experience with this, what sort of mechanisms should I be looking for in place to make sure I've got a good shot of getting my money back on time, right? There's projects in the market, we all know, it's common knowledge in India, that haven't been paid on time. When I'm looking at a project in a regional centre, what sort of things should I be looking for to give, there can't never be a guarantee, as Ignacio said, but the most assurance I can reasonably get that I'm likely to get my money back on time.
Yeah, I think you want to look at the model between equity, preferred equity, loan, and then just read the documentation and make sure. I know that there's a lot of projects out there that may pitch it as a 5-year loan, but then if you actually read through the documentation, it's really 8-9 years, or they can hold it for however long. So it's really important to do your due diligence, and it's one thing what the actual person tells you, and it's another thing to actually look at the private placement memorandum and understand exactly how the loan or the equity or preferred equity is actually structured and how the repayment is actually going to be done.
Samir?
We have right now 2 different projects which are running, and on one of the projects, you can see our philosophy. What we've done is, one, we have of course chosen to work with one of the top developers with a very, very serious track record, billions of dollars in development done. project itself is fully financed. All the 192 condos are fully sold out. But even before that, what we've done is we've gone to the developer and we've taken several layers of guarantees from the developer at the LP level. The biggest risk to any project is, let's say, running out of funds, or if the clients decide to pull some funds out, there's a project escalation in the cost. So running out of funds is one of the biggest challenges to any project. So we've taken a project completion guarantee. So then we've also taken guarantees like if there is any failure of the petition, then somebody should not be stuck in the project for, let's say, 7 years, 7 years. That will keep it.
Let me interrupt you, because bluntly, I think that some of the guarantees can be some of the most misleading things in EB5, right? So with a guarantee, can you comment on the issue of who's the guarantor?
Yep. So what we've done is, instead of giving the guarantees to the investor are not allowed in EB5, but the guarantees can be taken from at the LP level, at the structure level, where the investors are coming in. So what we have done is we have gone to the parent entity of the developer itself, which is a $300 million plus balance sheet, and then we have taken a guarantee from them in case the project itself is not able to repay the loan back. Then the parent entity guarantees to pay this money back, and this is permissible as per USCIS.
So if you see a guarantee, read it,
Yeah.
and if you don't understand it, that's why you pay Ignacio big dollars, right? Ask Ignacio to read the guarantee and explain it to you, and he'll be able to do that. That's why you pay. A lot of times I see investors, they don't ask these kind of questions, and you should. If you're paying a lawyer, you should. And these loan documents, some of these, I'll say the name of it, it's not defamatory. There's this big Hudson Yards project, right? That to me was an extremely complicated project. And unless you're a real estate finance expert, there's no way you understood it. So you paid him money, ask him to read it and explain it to you, right? And the guarantees.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we do is we open up, all the documents that are submitted to USCIS are shared with you as well, so that you can do the due diligence on them, ask your immigration attorneys to explain these documents to you, and we open them up for you. We keep it very, very transparent.
Thank you. So Ignacio, I'm going to go back to you. So I will say we've had investors in 2 of the 3 people, actually 3 of the 3 if you count your employer, Greg's employer. We've never had a client. We've had one client we've had a couple of clients who were repaid late with somebody, and what our firm did was that we basically threatened the lawsuit, and our clients, the regional center involved, gave them all their money back. I won't get into that, but Ignacio, if you have a client, right, and something isn't quite right, which, as I said, 2 of these regional centers on stage, we've had money in. The only problem has been the money's come back early. We've never had a problem. So choose the project right. I'm just trying to say, don't be scared. Do your due diligence properly and don't be scared. But if you didn't do your due diligence properly, Ignacio, and you got a problem, can you help?
I think the real critical question is, can projects run into trouble? And I think that the COVID pandemic is a tremendous example of the best laid plans of mice and men. There were construction delays due to the pandemic. There were cost increases due to the economic conditions of supply and demand, things that needed to be resolved. And I think when I look at the behavior of regional centers as entities that invested the funds of the foreign investors into these projects, many of them were rather passive, but others were definitely very active. They were involved to the best of their abilities to try and navigate things, to get things to work out. And I found that tremendously helpful and a distinguishing mark of how to deal with adversity. From my perspective, the immigration process, even in the EB5 program, even in the best of circumstances, involves risk of profit and loss. And there are, for example, insurance products that I mentioned earlier, or buyout clauses, which again, a more transparent set of buyout rules in the March 22 legislation, which regional centers will be implementing as regulations are issued. And Matt, and I think the rest of the panel alluded to that as well. So there will be more clarity, but from an investor's perspective, there's just certain things that cannot be avoided, and that's the nature of the program. It is not a guaranteed program. And from my perspective, choosing the right regional center is important, choosing the right project is important, understanding things are important. And as an immigration lawyer, I know that Mark alluded to the idea that loan documents are beyond my capabilities. I do have to say, Mark, I have read maybe 3,000 loan documents. I can't remember. But the key point is this: why do I read them? Because the Immigration Service reads them. And not only that, under the March 22 legislation, we have a new tool which is good for investors and good for regional centers. It's the project pre-approval. The March 22 legislation formalized and required regional centers, all the excellent companies here, are required to file a project application before you as an investor invest. And that has to include key documents. And I suspect, even though we're at the very beginning of the new restart of the EB5 program, I strongly suspect the Immigration Service is going to take an active role in reviewing those documents. And of course, immigration lawyers and corporate counsel and regional centers are going to have to take an active role. But from the investor's perspective, why is that good? Because the regional centers are all going to have to follow a standard set of procedures to have more concrete documents submitted first to the Immigration Service before you ever see them. And that was not a requirement. It happened. Many regional centers did it very successfully, but it was not a requirement in the past. It's an absolute requirement today. So there's some things in the new legislation which offer a more transparent landscape. We can't take risk off the table. It's built into the program. As I said, the United States favors private enterprise, risk-taking, and entrepreneurship. And that's really part of the core of the program, along with child protection. So that's my answer to your question.
Right. Just for the record, I was not having a go at Ignacio's loan documents. I was having a go at, you will find some small regional centers that have gone and found an immigration law I've often never heard of, which is certainly not him. And they've cobbled together a bunch of loan documents, and you read the loan documents and you realize, yeah, they're used to doing grandma's poodles, dogs, green card, and they don't know their way around commercial loan agreements whatsoever at all. That's really what I meant, so I apologize if it came off right. I'm sorry. His loan documents, 8+++. So that said, we've talked about how to choose a project, I-526, how's long is it going to take, getting your money back. We've talked about everything. We are like a little overrunning all the time. So you really do have like a A++ panel here. So if you have a question, please ask it.